Okay, so I've got everything. Start recording. Okay, guys, welcome. Welcome to class. Ethan's always got to get his snarky remark in there right when I start. No one's going to hear you, so it doesn't matter. I always just delete you out. Yeah, yeah. Okay, so I wanted to just look at what we have for this week. So originally, last week, what I was going to do in week 5 was we were going to do Brexit. And U.S. and Cuba relations. However, with the Paris climate deal and Trump pulling out, I wanted to address that this week, and also because Jill, Professor Brumond, some of you might have taken her environmental science classes, she is going to be out of town the rest of my blended semester, and I wanted her to come in and do a climate change science lecture for you guys before we talked about the Paris Agreement. So I moved it to this week. So you'll notice that on the modules, everything reflects that. So for week 5, what you guys have is 2 chapters in your textbook, and then a video, the National Geographic Before the Flood film. It just came out pretty recently, I think late last year. And then you have just your week 5 quiz. So that's all you guys have this week. So Jill is going to take pretty much most of the class, and she's going to kind of give you a background, like the scientific background of climate change. Is I'm not a scientist. This is not something that I can give you. So she's going to speak till about 11:45. Then we're going to take a short break, and then when we come back, we'll do our what's trending. Since she's got to leave a little early, and we'll do that kind of at the end of the hour. So were there any questions about what we've got coming up so far or anything like that? We really only have about 3 weeks left of this blended class. So if you're having any issues with quizzes or anything in your grades, like, you know, you're probably failing, come talk to me and make sure we can hammer something out for the rest of the semester. But so far, everyone's doing pretty well. I got everything graded over the weekend for you. Just keep an eye on that week 7, because we also have like a week 7.5 kind of in here. So I put the final project under that and the blended participation assignment and your reflection essay too. So just keep that in mind that we kind of have that weird overhang for like a week 7.5. Okay. All right, Joe, I'm going to turn it over to you and let you do your thing. So thank you so much. Come on up.
Well, good morning, everyone. We're gonna make some exciting noise before we get started. Typically, I like to start out and kind of break the ice with just a reflection question for all of you. So this is probably a topic we hear a lot about in the media. Regardless of our personal or political views, we're going to kind of approach this from a scientific perspective. But I think it's important for all of us to at least have a bit of a perspective to start with. So we're going to get a quick definition before we actually answer this poll. So the question posed to all of you is anthropogenic climate change real? So does anybody know what the term anthropogenic means before we start pulling out our devices? Absolutely, yes. So a lot of the things we hear is the climate's been changing historically forever, right? We've had ice ages, we've had warm periods, so nothing about this is new. So the distinction here that we're making is saying that the theory is that some element that humans contribute to this particular challenge. So I'm going to turn over the floor to all of you. This is anonymous, so this is where we get the chance to then see where all of our thoughts lie initially. I can open this up so that people can... Do you have a code, or how does it... Oh wait, it says poll is locked. Just kidding. Okay, all right. So are you all familiar with how Poll Everywhere works? Yes. Okay, I figured that the fabulous Abby has already gone over.
If not, then they haven't been paying attention.
What is our keyword?
Is there a number we're supposed to type in? Or text, yes, no. Oh, just type in the word.
Oh, no, she'll give her... Are you doing keywords?
Yeah.
They should be. Are they not? Did I mess this up?
Go back to presenter session. No, you're good.
What am I looking at?
No, go back right under text messaging. To the right. To the right. Go down under text messaging.
Oh.
Okay, click on that.
This.
Yeah.
All right. So sorry. Okay. Technical difficulties.
How do I know if also A, B, or C?
Yeah. So A would be yes. I'm assuming B, no. That's weird. It always just gives me keywords.
Yeah, me too. Oh, and I've changed it again. Let's just, okay, all right.
Stop touching it, Jill.
I'm gonna stand over here.
Mine says A only
Yeah, it's
works
because you have
after.
to text Jill Bruman D928 to 37607 wants to join, and then
All right.
Oh,
Oh, okay.
I have to.
you text Jill Bruman D928.
You always have to have some kind of upset to the typical system that everybody is accustomed to. So sorry.
Come on, Jill.
Okay, so I have to text her name to that first.
And then it'll respond if you have entered this, that you've joined Jill Bruman's session, and then you text.
Apologies, everyone.
It makes it difficult.
We're learning.
My
Gotta make sure you're awake before we get
Yeah,
started.
yeah.
my phone keeps wanting to make it into one, like 3 words.
Did you mean Jill Bruman?
Now I'm gonna do it. Okay.
I've skewed our data results. Anybody who's in Heather's statistics class can now chastise me for my terrible sample collection. So sorry.
Okay, I just sent it.
Might be representative of this class,
So
but no.
it's not accepting my answer?
Well, it just says 100%. It doesn't say how many people.
Oh, fair enough.
All right, so we're going to quickly take a change then, and we're going to maybe a little bit less anonymously, but still to elicit some of this conversation. How many say yes? How many say no? Oh well, I guess if everybody is there.
You
Well,
gotta give us the option.
And how many are unsure? Maybe we're sort of in the yes camp, but we've heard enough that we're dubious of what's happening here. Okay, well, for those of you maybe who are joining us later online, your opinion may be different than those who are sitting in the classroom. So we would like to hear your thoughts as well, I don't know if you have a discussion forum for them to talk about this, but
This is the discussion forum.
all right.
So,
So, then I guess there's not too much if we're already at our 100% here. What are things we've heard about this particular element of climate change, anthropogenic? Yes.
Humans have caused a acceleration of climate change greater than we've seen in the past.
Absolutely. So temporal scale here is extremely important. So we're looking not just at the fact that the temperature is warming, but we're going to see a few figures and charts as we move forward showing that this scale, this amount of time that we've seen it occur is unprecedented. So a lot of the challenge we have with this, scientists don't agree, is not so much that they don't agree that it's happening, but rather what's the outcome going to be. There are things like cloud cover and some of these other things we're going to get into that are a little bit unknown. So we have general ideas of what it means, but not specific outcomes in mind. So, because everyone loves super exciting PowerPoints, this shall be oh, we've already done that.
I did that.
The medium of choice for today. So really we hear about CO2, right? Carbon dioxide is the thing that is the deadly gas of deadliness, which actually all of us are exhaling carbon dioxide right now. So it's also part of a natural process. And I always get one in a class that says, okay, so if we just stop breathing, we will solve the problem.
Yeah.
Which actually is not the solution, but rather looking at kind of the larger implications of all of this stuff that's been in our crust and in our earth that we're now burning and releasing. So it's not our breathing, it's not animal or human respiration, but rather all of these processes and industries that we use as humans. So we talk about it in the form of CO2 or what we call CO2 equivalent because that is by unit and by absolute value, the largest gas that we emit. So by tonnage. Is it the most powerful greenhouse gas though?
Yes? No.
Oh, okay. So these two lovely gentlemen are absolutely right. Methane is more powerful. We also have some of these smaller things like refrigerants, that actually, for anybody who's ever heard that, don't just get rid of your refrigerator, don't pierce the coils. Some of these human-created compounds actually have a longer lived time in the atmosphere, and they have a greater warming potential, which essentially says per unit, it absorbs more heat than some of these others. So we hear about carbon dioxide, but methane is about 24 times more potent. Where do we get methane?
Farts.
Hey, where do we
Right?
usually, yes, where do we usually get this this gaseous? I know now everyone's thinking this is cows. Absolutely. So important, we have our agriculture, which is like our cows, and we have things like landfills, which off gas because of decomposition. Yes.
And swamps and bogs.
Yes, yes, yes. So we do have natural processes that release this as well. So a lot of these gases, with the exception of some of these HFCs, we do have natural sources for. So a lot of these things are occurring. We're just now looking at the amount that it is being released. So swamps and bogs, very important, provide ecosystem services. They buffer for things like natural disasters. They provide habitats and different things for different creatures. But when we start industrial agriculture and putting all of these cows in one area and feeding them things that change the nature of the way they digest, and they're constantly, burping, and, there's things coming out of both ends, we have to make sure that we account for that. Jason, I know you had your hand up.
I was just going to say, isn't most of the methane in our atmosphere from general biodegradation, and then we're just a relative percentage?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So, and that's, again, why when we talk about this, we talk about it in CO2 equivalent. So we can compare the apples to apples, so to speak. So the CO2 equivalent of methane then is going to be about 24 times. So 1 unit of 1 unit of methane is 24 units of CO2. So we can just categorize it that way. But it's not the biggest by unit emitted that we have. We also have things like nitrous oxide, which to some degree comes from vehicles, but particularly from manufacturing. Anybody who likes nylon, I know maybe not everyone in here is a nylon stocking type of person, but for those of you that like sports fabrics as well, for your exercise or other things, a lot of our synthetic fabrics actually contribute quite heavily to these kinds of industrial things.
No.
And I love yoga pants, so this is a very hard blow for me too.
Oh, bummer.
But so we're gonna get a little bit into, I know when we see like these kinds of charts, we just start to shut down and close our eyes and pretend that we're not in this class. We're not gonna get too much into some of the elements on the back end of this chart, but rather just looking at these two distinctions. So we have our natural and our anthropogenic. So this is saying contributing factors here. We have, of course, our solar irradiance. So if we're saying the amount of heat that's coming in, there are certain things that are not captured here, like volcanic activity, which actually initially has a net cooling impact, and then eventually gets a little bit into the warming, which we'll discuss in a moment. But we have our blue elements here that are our cooling forces, and our red and yellow elements here that are our warming forces. So we have our greenhouse gases, which we've kind of just discussed, but we also have things like cloud cover. So what might you think clouds would do to cool us? That seems kind of strange. Yes?
Well, they release the water
Okay.
that cools the earth.
Okay. So there's water vapor. Actually, water vapor, interestingly enough, is also a greenhouse gas, but very short-lived. So, yes?
They block a lot of the heat from the sun from actually reaching the Earth's surface.
Absolutely. So we have a concept called albedo, which essentially is a fancy term for reflectivity. So lighter colored surfaces, as you're probably aware, for those of you maybe who bought white cars, because you knew you were coming to Arizona, and you knew that it would be marginally cooler maybe when you sat in there and hopefully don't burn your leg on your seatbelt. So you get a lighter colored car because more of that solar radiation will be kind of reflected back. Not all of it, it still gets hot. But same idea with clouds. Now clouds are a little bit of this little factor that causes scientists trouble. Because while it has cooling impacts, you can also say that the solar radiation that makes it through, that's reflected off of something like snow or a light-colored surface, hits the cloud, gets reflected back down. So you're not necessarily just a net cooling, you're getting other elements that start making models and some of these accounting factors very difficult. So when we say things like, okay, clouds are great because they cool, there's more to it than that. So just kind of generally speaking, a lot of these things, even things like volcanoes, which I mentioned earlier, they release what we call aerosols, which are essentially particles that reflect the sun. And so when it's released, it acts kind of like a cloud, as Jason mentioned, with kind of this reflectivity. But then you also have all of these greenhouse gases that have been released. So it reflects and cools for a little while as the aerosols kind of settle. But then they dissipate, and all we have left is the radiative forcing of these greenhouse gases. So nature can even have some of these dramatic impacts as well. So we're not just talking about man-made things, but we're focusing largely on that because of the temporal scale that we're talking about. So is anyone familiar with the greenhouse gas effect? Vaguely. Oh, okay. All right. Would anyone like to share what that looks like or what that means? Yes?
Isn't it when light light from the sun enters, and then they can't really escape, so it becomes heat. It becomes trapped inside the ozone layer.
Yes. So essentially, we're looking at this nice little blanket where we have it kind of happily enter our atmosphere, and then it kind of keeps it in and warms up the planet. So when we have a nice little blanket, which we have already heard from natural processes like bogs, like animal respiration, like the kind of biomass where you have trees grow, trees die and release the carbon that they've been holding. We have kind of this nice balance of a happily cooled planet or warmed planet. But when we start increasing that blanket, like we probably know in a nice Arizona summer, you might have one sheet on, but you're probably not going to be putting on multiple other things to keep yourself warm, because then you're going to be hot and not able to sleep, and you're going to have a bad night. So same kind of idea here. Very important process, something that makes sure that we are a habitable planet, but to the extreme becomes something that's a little bit less ideal. Does anyone have questions on anything we've gone through so far? Yes?
Why is it called greenhouse gases?
That is a very interesting question. So really, because of this particular phenomenon, because of the greenhouse effect, they've just been coined greenhouse gases. I wish I had a more sophisticated reasoning and rationale for you.
As a kid, I'm just like, oh, we should get rid of greenhouses because they're affecting the planet.
They release these things from these greenhouses that are greenhouse gases.
That's why I don't eat vegetables, because they're killing us.
Well, I have good news for you. You can eat all the vegetables now.
Okay.
Yes.
I think it's based on the actual greenhouse. Because the greenhouse does exactly
Right,
the same
yes,
thing.
yes. So the process is named after exactly the fact that we've designed something essentially that helps us grow food, particularly in areas where maybe we don't have the best climate for certain, we want our tomatoes, but if we want our tomatoes in England, well, maybe we go to Spain if that's the case. But we might also create a greenhouse so that we can kind of foster and facilitate certain humidity, certain temperatures. And so exactly, it does come from a process that we use for agriculture and for growing our food and other plants. Did you have something else?
I was just going to say the same thing.
Yes.
Got it.
I want to get to two. Okay, so just as kind of a quick side note, which I already slightly mentioned, but so that we know this is something, this greenhouse effect is something that's important because we would be quite a bit cooler, average speaking, than we would if we didn't have it. So we'd be about 0 degrees if we didn't have it versus our average of about 59 degrees. So this is going to become important a little bit later on because probably for those of you who've been following with some of these things with the Paris climate agreements, you've maybe heard this 2-degree magic sweet spot as something that we don't want to go above. Have we heard this?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Does anybody have context for what that means? Like 2 degrees, like, oh, if it's 117 or 119 in Arizona, it's
Well,
still hot.
Aren't they referring to the average?
Yes.
The worldwide
Yes.
average, right?
Yes. So just for a bit of perspective, I think it's a little bit later on, which will come back to. But the last ice age was only about 5 degrees cooler than today. So we're talking about global average. And for those of you who are maybe, I don't know, anybody in here done a bit of ecology or some of those kinds of things, changes in temperature change a lot of different things. It changes how much rainfall. In certain cases, it can impact the pH of different river systems. A lot of animals, including ourselves, if you see that your blood is acidic, it only takes, minute changes in that for us not to be able to survive. So 2 degrees sounds like nothing because we're thinking 115 versus 117, which we're like, okay, well, I'm just going to stay inside, it'll be fine. But we are looking at something that's going to have overall impacts on, drier places are getting drier, wetter places are getting wetter. Not all places are going to be hot. We might see certain areas getting colder. So my instructor used to call it global weirding instead of global warming, which is kind of my favorite term. Yes.
So when you say 2 degrees, that's Celsius though, right?
Correct.
So how much is 2 degrees like in Fahrenheit, roughly? Would it be like 10 degrees or so?
It's about, what is the conversion?
Because I think we're the only country that does Fahrenheit.
Yes.
So that's why it's
Yes.
Celsius.
It's about 3.5 degrees.
Per Celsius.
But
One Celsius.
now I'm forgetting the conversion.
So I got 1 Celsius equals 33.8. You said it was 2, so that'd be 77.6. Is that right?
That sounds
We're not changing
really
70s.
high.
Yeah, no. We're looking at something a little bit less dramatic than that. The conversion factor now I'm forgetting. But it's a smaller. It's not. We're not talking about dramatic. We're not going from 1,000,000 degrees or like a nice happy 57 degrees to like 600 degrees. We're looking at something that's a reasonably small shift. Has anyone seen a chart like this before? What is the context for this chart?
It's the historic carbon dioxide levels.
Yes. Yes. So we have all of these things from before the year 1950. Where the heck do we get this data?
Rocks. You guessed.
Which, yes. In fact, we did it. Just thought the line looked pretty and, it was nice. For those of you who are going to be watching before the flood, you're going to see this kind of hockey stick. You're going to hear from the scientist that kind of found this initially and all of the interesting threats and things that he's experienced. I won't get into that because you will be experiencing that through your viewing. But Jason, did you have something?
I was just gonna say, don't they get these records from looking at the carbon levels in the sediment in the rock layers?
Yes. So you can do it through sediment. You can also do it through ice cores. Ice cores are pretty cool because a lot of these ice sheets are very, 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 very old. You can kind of get a nice little ice core, and then based on ice aging and some of these things that people who are far more clever than I have done, there are actually air bubbles that get trapped when the ice is frozen. So you can get a quick snapshot of what that time period looked like for global kind of gases. So it's kind of a cool way that they've looked at some of these things, we also build our models looking at some of these as well. So if we say, okay, in the future we're going to say that this impacts X, we're also going to say, if we back plug in some of these factors, does it match what we've seen? So of course that's not a perfect system, because doing something that happened in the past doesn't necessarily mean with 100% certainty that it's going to happen in the future, as probably people with any degree of scientific inquiry are aware, but it does help kind of us understand some of the forcing, radiative forcing powers that have happened in the past. So what do we notice then at 1950 and beyond?
Industrial revolution.
So we've started doing a lot more with our industry. More people have cars, more people have, maybe now we can have TVs and all of these other things in our houses. Yes?
Well, do you think there's a connection too with the rapid population growth from like the year 1900? Like, I mean, human population hit 7 billion recently, and by 1950 it's supposed to be 9 billion, and it took a while to get to the billion mark, but then everyone just keeps reproducing.
There was also something called the baby boom.
Yep.
Absolutely. So population is something that is an important factor, but we also have to be aware, and you'll see this a little bit in the documentary that you're going to watch, that we always kind of point our fingers at China and India and say, these people over here that have huge populations, and in fact, China is the largest emitter of greenhouse gases, but individual Chinese people are still less of a contributor than any one of us sitting in this room. So I'm not, or online. But this is not accusatory, but rather just that we also have to be aware that lifestyle is something that impacts wealth and kind of disposable income. If I have the ability to go on a trip, or to buy a lot of meat for my family, or to have 4 vehicles that are very big and gas guzzly, it's my right as an American to do that. So that's what I'm going to do. Does that mean everyone in this room does that? No, of course there's kind of averages, and you may fall above or below that. But population is something that's important, but lifestyle is something that we also have to keep in mind. So then, to give a little bit more of a characterization then of this kind of little piece, what do we notice about this chart?
Oil, increase in oil.
Like technology as it goes up.
Absolutely. So we go from, kind of a very basic form of movement and energy use to, now we can hold computers in the palms of our hands. We have all these other things that we charge constantly, that we use constantly, that we maybe drive or travel with constantly. Was there a hand? Yes?
Thanks to Trump, coal's gonna increase.
So this is something that's important too. The way that our leaders decide and subsidize or support different lobbies is something that impacts the use of our energy. Kind of interesting, when I was studying in the UK, my instructor told me that, we see this as if the US suddenly decreases their coal use, everyone will decrease their coal use, right? Because, we're going to start investing in renewables and it's going to be great. But the price of coal then drops because the demand drops, which means now Britain over here, or another country, not to poke holes in Britain just because that's the example he gave me since we were in Britain, starts to buy up this coal. So the amount that we use stays reasonably kind of steady. It does increase, but it's not something that we're just saying, okay, if one country, like a big user like the US, stops using it, we've set a great example for the rest of the world. Because now we also have the means in place to kind of sell this to other countries who might find that price more illustrious. Yes?
But it's not only that, but a lot of the companies that deal with these things, for example, the oil and car companies,
Absolutely.
they've been buying up patents for cars that run on natural gas, solar, water, they take it, they buy it, and they stick it in a drawer somewhere and lock it away so they can keep their monopoly on the oil and car industry.
Yes.
I mean, we could be running on water, we could be running on solar, we could be running on natural gas, and we can reduce the oil and coal and everything else. But same thing with solar. I mean, there's, you know, I mean, we have deserts in the United States. Isn't it like if you covered the world in solar panels, enough light hits the earth in one day to power the world?
More than the world. The world,
I mean,
50,000 times over.
You know, I just drove from Havasu back. There's plenty of desert. Let's put some solar fields out there.
Absolutely.
I'm with you, Frank.
Yeah. For
I mean-
people interested in the transportation issue specifically, there's a really good documentary called Who Killed the Electric Car
Yeah.
that actually, Who Killed the Electric Car?
Oh, yeah.
There is actually, you know, as much as we like to go, oh, it's conspiracy theory, there have been,
It is a conspiracy.
you know, support of these things essentially, that there are companies that will say, okay, well, we'd like to continue to stay very competitive. Jason?
But that's why, like, the advent of electric car creation from people like Tesla and Elon Musk is rocking the car industry so much.
Absolutely.
So, and the fact that he's rocking so many industries makes him a large target, but the fact that he's doing that makes it so that other people can do it as well.
Right.
Other people can get into it, because once you get one person passed, it basically opens up the floodgate for other companies
Right.
to start doing it.
Right.
And he also isn't he developing stuff for the home too?
Yes.
Solar.
Solar,
Yep.
Batteries
Solar.
for your
tiles.
home and stuff like
Solar
that.
roof.
Solar City came out with no, actually no, it was Tesla. I don't know.
Tesla is so rude.
Yeah, the new solar
Yep.
roof, which is just paneling. Literally, you just take the panels off of your roof and you put in solar panels
Yep.
where your panes were.
And it's about the same price for if you were going to replace your whole roof with
Right.
regular roof versus.
Well, I looked into APS because APS like contacted me and my husband. And they're like, "Hey, we can give you solar." I said, "Okay,
Yeah.
great. Well, how much is it going to take off my monthly bill?" And they're like, "Oh, about $30 a month." I'm like, I started laughing. I laughed on the phone. I was like, "You're going to give me solar panels and it's only going to save me $30 a month?" I was like, "No, I'm not interested in that."
Oh,
This is something that's really interesting as well, because we talk about like, oh, well, if we just put the solar panels, they will come. But we have also companies that are like, well, we have to charge you a hookup fee because you're going to be putting it back on the grid, and we manage this grid, and you know, since we can't charge you for the actual, you know, use of our resources, we're going to find other ways to make it very difficult for you. So as a consumer who's maybe peripherally interested and engaged with this, you don't necessarily want to go out of your way to deal with all of that bureaucracy and stuff. I think your hand was up, and then we'll go back to Jason.
And I was gonna say the cool thing about Elon Musk's solar roof tiles is that if you're a Tesla car owner, those roof tiles don't only like power your home, but they also charge your car. So therefore, you're like pretty much using clean renewable energy for
There you go.
transportation and everything.
We should come back to this, because electric vehicles are kind of hailed as one of the, you know, paragons of what's going to cause us to be sustainable in the future, but we'll come back to why some of those things might be a little more difficult than they seem. Yes?
Well, I was just going to say something like that, because the biggest problem with anything electric or solar based is battery capacity.
Right.
yes.
But recently, with the advent of new solid state batteries coming out that are far more efficient than any batteries that we have now that are liquid based, it's looking like solar based and other renewable energies are going to be much better and much more easily done, because we're going to be able to store all that energy
Yes.
very
So
cheaply.
this is extremely important. The battery capacity, Tesla's also come out with some of these other packs. But what is a electric vehicle if we just plug it into our wall socket?
Because it's coal, right?
It's a coal-fired car, for the most part, depending on where you live. So you're going to be just plugging into the grid with whatever distribution of resources. For Arizona, that's going to be a little bit higher in nuclear, because we have the largest nuclear plant in the country, but still largely coal-fired. So that's something that we'd have to keep in mind as well. I know maybe some of you in here in NetSec might also say, well, if we start connecting all of these grids, we're also going to have other challenges with what if somebody tries to hack it? What do we do with some of these smart grids and different things, which is a challenge. Maybe an opportunity for some of you if you are interested in in using your skills in a field like this. But what about usage? When are they going to plug in their vehicles? So what is that going to do to electricity costs when everybody's home making their dinner? Maybe they turn on the TV to watch the news. Maybe they're sitting in their hot tub. I don't know. Wishful thinking on my part. Okay.
You want a hot
So
tub in Arizona?
plug them in at work.
Okay.
I
So
mean, the schools, I know, I live in Surprise, so the schools there, they all have these parking lots covered with solar panels.
I've noticed that too lately.
Which, I mean, so, put solar panels at work in the parking lot and charge your car at work.
right. So
Provide shade too.
there are a lot of things. Yeah, there you go. Double whammy. There are a lot of things that we have to be critical of when we talk about these kinds of technologies as well. I'm not discounting them as great, but we do have to be aware of when people are using things, how people are using things, what's the range on the vehicle. If I'm going to invest in something like this, even like Tesla's new Model 3, which is reasonably priced, and there's the option for a certain number of buyers to also get a pretty good discount in tax rebates and such. There's still that. If I'm constantly driving to California from Arizona, do you either have something in place that I can charge up pretty quickly, swap out my battery, whatever that system would look like, or does that mean I have to drive city with this car and then I have to get another vehicle for my long schleps to wherever it is I want to go? I think your hand was up, and then we'll come back over.
I was actually going to ask you. You mentioned something about solid-state batteries. Have those been released, or are they still being tested on?
So, last I checked, about 4 weeks ago, a research paper came out from that was headed by a research team that was led by the guy who first made the lithium batteries, and they released documents documenting their prototype for a solid-state battery that was made from, I believe it was made out of carbon, iron, and possibly it's carbon, iron, and something else. But it was completely solid state, and it was using a phenomenon that isn't fully understood yet. But at the moment, it's theorized to provide energy capacities that, it basically improves the standard batteries we have now 100%. Every aspect of our current batteries would be improved with this battery.
So I've heard about them. I just didn't know if they were released or not.
No, it hasn't been released. It's a prototype. Basically, it's a research paper that documents the prototype.
Okay.
So,
If you're interested in other examples too that are on the market, they have things through Tesla that you can look at as well that are pretty cool. Is there another? I think your hand in there.
I was just gonna say that going from state to state back home, you see, like in Arizona, the mall down the street you can plug your car in.
Absolutely.
And I think it's gonna be harder for other states to get on board, like Iowa, where it's mostly wind power. I haven't seen a single charge like you can plug your car in.
Okay.
So I think other states, it's gonna take a while for them to get on board with stuff like charging your car or other stuff like that. Because I know Iowa is the leader. I think it's actually Nebraska's the leader, but in ethanol gas because of corn.
Right.
So it's gonna be hard for them to that's their main
Right.
thing. So it's gonna be kind of hard for them to get off of that.
Right. And population density is something that's important as well. If I'm going to be setting up charging stations, I want there to be enough people that are kind of going through it for it to be worth it, especially if things are a little more spread out or if there are fewer people. David, I think you had.
Regardless, it's still going to use a lot of natural resources.
Yes, interesting,
Regardless.
because the resources it takes to build a battery is something we also have to consider when we're looking at, what is a sustainable option. There are trade-offs. So you might be more sustainable in one element, and maybe you suffer in another area. So that's also, I wish I had a magic bullet solution to just be like, the solution is this, but if we had that solution and we knew what it was, it would be a little bit easier to characterize these. Well,
Yeah.
that could happen and could work, but probably not the most satisfactory or happy reason to.
My daughter's waiting for the zombie apocalypse.
Yes.
Oh, I don't know if you're gonna touch class, but what's this Paris climate agreement that the U.S. is pulling out of?
We're gonna talk about that on Wednesday.
Okay.
So I wanted her to do kind of the science background,
Oh, okay.
and then we're gonna actually read the Paris Climate Agreement and go through it and talk about the implications and things like that on Wednesday. So that we all know what we're talking about then when people, because no one's read it. That's the thing. All these people are like, "Ooh, it's so terrible or it's so good." Well, have you read it and seen like what the actual implications are? So we're gonna do that on Wednesday.
Would be interesting.
Well, Ethan doesn't know how to read, so we'll read it to him and
Is
help
there like
him.
pictures?
There's no pictures.
Jason, did you have something else? I know your hand was up.
I'm looking for the research paper. Figuring out what exactly it
Are
was
you
for the
still
solid
on
state batteries.
sharing your screen? 'Cause I don't see the blue.
Uh-oh.
The blue dropped like 5 minutes ago. I didn't notice that.
No,
Oh, this is
that.
not the one.
It's more the red
Go
dot.
up, yeah, go, and then go down and have that minimized.
Now I've totally forgotten where everything is.
We might just need to redo it on the top left.
Starting class.
No, it's just sharing the screen. I know, right? We gotta start from the beginning, guys. Everyone remember their questions and the order that they were asked.
Can you recycle those car batteries?
They're components that they bring them in and they'll do certain things with it, but not everything. Some of it's just safe disposal, so that you don't want to just like leave it out, so that like
What
some
is
of
that?
the
Do they just put it in like a closet somewhere?
they remove like some of the battery acid and they'll take some of the components and recycle them, but some of it's just so that we don't get, you know, like if you just throw it away and then it starts leaking and it gets into groundwater and other things that would cause challenges for
One's
us.
in Michigan or something.
So, but any other questions? Okay. So then here's kind of another chart from Mauna Loa, which is essentially where we've taken a lot of our climate data in a more recent sense. So we notice that things are kind of going up. But what is this weird zigzag from this red line?
Is that carbon dioxide?
Yes, yes. So this is the amount of atmospheric carbon that's measured at this kind of research station.
Well, it's kind of like an upward trend, but it also goes up and down as it's upward trending.
Yes. I'll give you a little hint. These different points are seasonal. So we take one measurement at one part of the year and another measurement at the other part of the year. So why would we notice during the same year that we have a decent variation in the amount of carbon that's in our atmosphere?
Summer and winter.
Yes, summer and winter. What is the difference between these two seasons?
It is cold in the summer. You use more heat.
Okay.
And it's hot in the summer. Oh, no, wait.
You just flipped it, Ethan. Well, because it's like the heating patterns, like people are using to like heat their homes.
So people are getting good and intense and thinking hard about this. This is naturally speaking.
The amount.
As the things get colder, they get more condensed,
Okay.
and as they get hotter, they spread out more.
So we're getting good thoughts here, but we're really looking at the amount of biomass. What happens in the winter to most of our plants?
Oh, they die.
They die.
And they release their
So
carbon.
we release a lot of that carbon, which is embodied in our trees and in some of our plants, into the atmosphere. So even though we see, looking at this, an upward trend that kind of categorizes a lot of different things that are happening, like use of energy in different seasons and other things, we also see that naturally there is a variation because we have quite a big difference in amount of plant life that is living during different parts of the year. So kind of interesting, I think, that we also capture Mother Nature's impacts, because we do hear that as something that, you know, well, it happened in the past, things are always changing, we have plants and stuff. We do, and that is captured, but we're also still seeing that it's reasonably consistent in that kind of change year on year, seasonally. So this is not really contributing to this upward trend, but rather just kind of following a pattern as we trend upward. So kind of interesting. Did I have my thing in the other one? No, you're going to see that already. are we from in this class?
Connecticut.
Oh, okay. So we've got some Arizonans, we got some East Coasters. I like it.
Iowa.
Illinois.
Okay.
You guys are enthusiastic.
So we've got a lot of different areas here. I do have a link. I don't know if it's still. No. Okay. Well. Luckily, some of these things have been captured by NASA and other scientific organizations. But I can find the back-end data for where that was initially linked. But this is kind of an example of the Southwest. So obviously, some of us in this room, maybe this is less exciting because we're going to be leaving Arizona when we are done because it's too hot and terrible and whatever. But
People suck.
we are, aw.
Mostly
But we do see that there's going to be likely increases in temperature. Now, what does that mean for things like water?
dries up.
Yes? Why is that a problem for a desert city or a desert region?
Will die.
Will die. So there are certain implications here then, not just that, oh, I'll just have to crank my AC up and pay a little bit of extra money, but also, what do we do for cities like LA and Phoenix, which, is kind of already, especially in California, we've seen recently that droughts are already causing us problems. How do you think this maps then to places on the East Coast? Yes?
Oh, I was gonna say, California can solve a lot of their water problems. Just build a desal plant. They're surrounded by
Interesting.
freaking water on one whole
Well, I know,
freaking
but the
side.
problem too, though, with that is, if you desalinate ocean water and we just start sucking up ocean water, doesn't that create another host of
It
problems?
changes
Where-
the climate big time.
Right, because then you're messing with ocean levels. Isn't that a problem?
Everyone always sees the problems. No one ever seems to find the solutions.
Well, I agree with you on that, Frank. But it just seems like you would be replacing one problem with another. What do you think?
So that's part of it. The other challenge here is that if we start doing that, there's an energy cost to desalinating as well. There's other
That's what I was gonna say. It costs a lot of energy to desalinate anything on a massive scale. A
so
lot of energy.
that's something that
All that sunlight hitting the earth.
if we can capture that, there you go.
That's what the solar panels are
Wait a
for.
second, solar
And then
panels.
there's the installation cost of those.
There's a plague.
Once again,
The
everyone
problem
always
is you
seems
have to find
the
somebody to
problem, not the
invest.
solution.
No, but you're absolutely right. There are things that we have in place. There are also, even just from the social perspective, we see people with lush lawns and nice fountains in front of some of these buildings. We don't necessarily need to use water in that way either. We can reduce without starting to build new things. That to desalinate, we can also consider where are other ways that we can cut back or do other things that can help manage that.
We're not getting rid of Splash Mountain.
Like not have
No way.
not have Kentucky. Frank is not on board with that. He said,
No,
or
we
not have
use-
Kentucky bluegrass in Arizona, where
use
you
Splash
have to
Mountain.
water it so much.
One of the biggest cotton producers in the U.S. is Arizona. Cotton requires lots and lots and lots and lots of water. So kind of interesting. There's also a concept of virtual water, which will become more important as we.
Water.
Oh yes, yes. What is that, you ask?
Yeah.
This is something that moving into the future is going to become a much more dramatic problem. So when we say virtual water, which sounds like fake and made up and digital, right? Virtual, we're essentially saying there's an embodied amount of water in any resource. So if we grow an apple in Arizona and we send that to Kentucky, I don't know why we would do that, but say we decided to do that, that water that could have been used in that region is now benefiting another region. So we see that in manufacturing, we see that in growing, so cotton that I'm wearing in Arizona that was made in Arizona, but also cotton that's, maybe the Gap decided that they're gonna make a new shirt and they're using this Arizona cotton that's then sold in all kinds of other states. We have a water cost that comes with that. So we call it virtual water just because we're not using it as a commodity as such, where we're like, okay, I'm shipping bottled water or a certain amount of my water rights or resource to a different state, but rather that I'm using a product that has benefited from water in a particular region.
So we're gonna charge you 95 cents for the apple and 5 cents for the water.
There you go. So, but that kind of concept, just looking at when we redistribute some of these resources and when they get more scarce, what does that mean if we're still growing and still doing some of these things in regions that are water scarce, that we're then even basically shipping that water or that benefit of that water somewhere else?
Was that kind of like how Arizona takes water from the Colorado River?
Yes, yes. That if anybody's interested in a long, ongoing legal battle, the Colorado River Compact and all of the states that signed on to that for a certain amount of water resources and allocation, that is a very interesting fight. They actually allocated in a water-rich year, so we've not really seen that amount of water to begin with anyway. So kind of interesting, and as these things modify and as flow and stream and things adjust, we're going to have even bigger challenges. We see people growing in different ways. So LA saying we need more water because we're growing faster, we have more people than, you people in Nevada. And, Arizona's growing fast too. How do we figure out who gets water, who's entitled to that water?
Drink more beer, save water.
How much virtual water does it take to
Do
make
you know
beer
what the
though?
number one ingredient in beer is, Ethan?
Water.
Happiness.
Yeah.
Did you have a thought or a question?
Oh no, I was just gonna say I saw this episode on Shark Tank where they invented this thing called tree TP, and it's like
Yeah.
you put a dome thing over like a plant or a tree, whatever you're growing, and it recycles the water that you put into that plant, and it saves you like gallons of water. It's pretty crazy. He sells them for like they invested in it, and he sells them for like $1 each or something. To farmers, yeah.
Interesting.
It's really cool.
There are a lot of things, smaller projects and people that have come into working with different technologies. There's a really interesting nuclear technology that I think this boy maybe was 16 or 17, but there's some really interesting things happening for making people a little bit more energy independent. So what do you think happens when we decentralize the grid?
Oh God, chaos.
Donald Trump makes a statement.
Okay, so our current producers are absolutely not going to like that, because you're absolutely right. They lose money. Yes.
Fluctuations in power usage are harder to handle.
Absolutely. So if we're looking at one power plant or one large power plant, we have economies of scale and benefits from we have more of this functioning, and we have infrastructure in place, and we have one area that we're sending our resources, and some of those things make it a little bit easier and more cost efficient, and maybe more able to deal with some of these shocks, because we then take all of this data of use and modify and kind of change our patterns. So that's absolutely something that we need to consider. Yes?
The big energy companies wouldn't lose a lot of money because they can they say rates on each individual state. They say, okay, say Arizona for instance, okay, we have a nuclear plant. It'd be cheaper here, but if it was on like Midwest and they want to use nuclear power from here, we'll charge you more to use our power plant.
Okay.
Same thing with the dam. The states be fighting over that. They fighting over it now. They definitely be fighting over it.
So economies of scale is something that's extremely important. Once you've built it, then there are implications there. So it's right to be critical, but where could we see some element of a sustainable solution coming from decentralizing, at least to some degree?
Politicians don't get paid that much.
Okay, so we have maybe less powerful lobbies, potentially, or they might crop up in different ways, so we might not necessarily get rid of them. We might just shift what they look like. Yes?
You could base your expected power usage. You can estimate that and then build your infrastructure or your power production based off of that.
Okay.
So there could be businesses that could do that.
we hear a lot in the news about terrorism, right? We've heard, even recently in Britain with that, was it Friday?
Yeah, we're talking about that one a little bit later.
So we
today.
won't get into that, but we hear a lot about these terrorism, basically. If we have a group that knows Phoenix gets their energy from this place, or London gets their energy from this place,
Right.
where do we could potentially get a more robust structure if I have to go and bomb or destroy 17 places versus 2 or 3, or more than 7, depending on what your microgrid system looks like, you might have a much more robust system in that sense. Now, there are costs associated with that. There's usage questions. If I'm going to say I'm going to put solar panels on my house, my energy usage probably looks different than yours. How many people are in your house versus my house? What orientation is my house versus your house? Do I have big trees? I mean, in certain cases, I'm thinking of solar in this context, but you might also look at things like wind or other renewables. But there are a lot of different things that we can characterize as potential solutions, but I'm glad that we have come up with critiques of some of these, because challenges would absolutely come in the form of, if we're trying to combat this, we have a lot of things and we do usually focus on the problems, and we don't necessarily come to the table with these solutions. So it's important to at least consider them. Oh, we looked at that. Okay. So to take a quick diversion then, we hear a lot about this, scientists are not sure. There is uncertainty in the scientific community, right? It's not real. I'm holding a snowball right now, global warming isn't real, which is the most ridiculous argument I've ever heard. And a very simple climate versus weather discussion should clear that up for anybody who is unaware of, that sometimes it still snows even when the climate is changing. But why do we hear this?
Well, doesn't the whole point of science is to leave things open for if we're wrong or if new information comes to light?
Absolutely, right? So if you ask a scientist, tomorrow is the sun going to rise? I mean, logically, from everything we've experienced up to this point,
It should.
we would say yes. Is it 100% certain?
No.
Where are a lot of things we don't understand. I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm not trying to say tomorrow the sun won't rise. But there are a lot of things that come into play that we don't necessarily understand. Yes?
One of the biggest things is that you can think of the science as a sort of belief system, and that sort of clears up a lot of the skepticism people have of why people say these things are relative or they're not exactly sure. Because by saying it's a belief system, you make it clear that you're not 100% certain.
Right.
You're never 100% certain.
Right.
There's always that chance that something is wrong, and
Right.
that's what you have to understand.
Right, and even things like gravity, we know that if you're clumsy like Jill and you catch your foot, you are going to fall. Or if you are standing looking down off of a cliff, you should hopefully have a parachute or a bungee. Or I don't know what else might be happening in your mind at that moment, but you should at least be aware that if you jump off of that cliff, you are going to fall down. Is there possibly a place on planet Earth somewhere where that doesn't hold true? Possibly. Is it likely? Probably not. But we have kind of this system where a lot of times, and especially because most scientists are not trained to talk to the media and talk to the public, the way we talk to each other is through peer review. We critique each other and say, okay, have you thought of this? Why did you design your experiment this way? What about this? Why is this your control? Why did you hold this constant? So we have kind of that constant back and forth. Okay, so you've made an interesting point, but have you considered these other factors? So a lot of times when they come to the table to discuss these things, they characterize a lot of their discussion through that kind of talk. Not because they're saying there is room here for the fact that we are lying to you, because it's just some great benefit to us to lie to you for something that doesn't benefit us at all. I mean, unless you're giving us research money, then I'll totally lie to you. No, I'm just kidding. But there's not a benefit to that. A lot of these people have dedicated their lives to understand why something does or doesn't work. But they come to the table with that kind of discussion. So, and because our media is set up to always have two sides, which in many cases, you know, we like to hear that, or many sides, not just two.
You can tell we focus on the media in class.
We kind of have that, okay, well, if you're saying yes, there's got to be a no. You know, would we have the same discussion on gravity? Would we have one scientist who's like, yes, but this could be not a thing everywhere? That would be kind of ridiculous. I mean,
people think the Earth's flat.
there are still those people. But so that kind of, with that context, that's something that's important to consider. And of course, when we have then people who benefit from money, from industries that do contribute to this type of problem, we then have that like, but what about this? So there is kind of a thought here, and same kind of idea with cigarettes. We still have kind of this idea that there's, you know, with 100% certainty, are you going to get cancer when you smoke for long periods of time? No, because individually we have a lot of different things happening. You know, there are probably, my cousin's, some relative that's somehow removed from, like twice removed, I don't know, smoked from like age 13 and she's 104. So she's just like, no nonsense, I'm gonna smoke. So in that case, she doesn't have cancer yet, hopefully she won't get cancer. But it's not 100% certainty. So that kind of thing, same idea. We have a lot of other things happening here that we have confidence intervals that essentially are saying with a certain amount of certainty or of our understanding of this topic that something's going to happen. So is it possible that climate change will happen and it doesn't impact us at all? It's possible. Is it likely? Probably not, since we've seen things becoming warmer and warmer for the last 8 years. We've seen storms get larger and more frequent. We've seen a lot of these other things that have been postulated to be problems. So we anticipate, because typically, if anybody's familiar with feedback loops, there's a lot of times things are reinforced and in certain cases exacerbated, made worse. And so we need to make sure that we stay safe, so maybe we're a little bit more conservative in what we should do than what might need to be done. Yes?
What could possibly cause like a global cooling? Would it like a Yellowstone blow
Ooh,
up?
yes, good question. So there is the supervolcano, the Yellowstone caldera. There would be other implications for that. It might be a cooler world, but we'd also have ash and destroy our agriculture and the breadbasket of the world, which is currently...
Like a plague.
Ethan just keeps coming back to this plague.
We need a
Okay.
new one.
Volcano's
we
overdue,
will.
isn't it? Like, it's very overdue.
Yes, there is thoughts that could be something. For people who are unaware, there is a very large supervolcano that essentially could erupt with a power that we have not experienced as humanity.
Where?
Like the Yellowstone area.
Oh man, that's close to us.
Oh, it was, yes, we're gonna...
So I'll be moving back to the East Coast next year.
Yeah.
Are we gone? It goes. We're
But
gone, right?
if we...
We're gone.
Sweet, dude.
It's going to be a problem. And it's going to be a global problem because it impacts, I don't know for those of you familiar with the Iceland volcano that kind of halted air travel.
Yeah.
There's issues with the amount of ash that then you can't grow things. Of course, people in the direct area with breathing and kind of exposure to some of those things would be a problem.
Yeah, we're not in the insta-kill area.
Right.
We're not?
Insta-kill.
I gotta look at this.
Okay.
But
We should go there.
there's actually, this brings up an important point. Has anybody heard of geoengineering? Vaguely. What does it sound like it could be?
Engineering, geographic stuff.
Okay. We got our two little
Build
I like
rocks
it.
and stuff.
building. Sorry.
You build rocks.
Okay, so it's engineering our Earth. So that would be things like, there are some ridiculous types of concepts where we have things like space mirrors, where if we shoot things up into space and we can just reflect it back out and we can reduce the amount of incoming solar radiation. So then we don't have to change our behavior.
Are they really called space mirrors?
Yes, you can look at, yes. Now that's one of the more
Wait, hold on.
ridiculous.
That's like Ronald Reagan's SDI in the 1980s. You guys remember that from history classes? Okay, go on. Sorry.
Not one that we are probably going to follow up with because of cost and because of various other things, especially with the amount of space junk we have up there. Hitting those mirrors that are very expensive going to be a problem. But things like modifying our climate to react to things similarly to like a volcano. If we have aerosol particles, we can increase the amount of solar radiation that's reflected back. So there's thoughts to do that. There's also thoughts to modify these little nuclei that essentially you can create dust particles around them that then induce rain for areas that don't have as much rain using silver nitride. So there are certain cloud seeding. So there are certain things that we can do either to help combat this or to help manage and adapt to these changes. So geoengineering is something that's very interesting and kind of a cool, I don't want to say fringe science, but I'm going to say fringe science because a lot of the thoughts behind them are well-founded but maybe somewhat unrealistic. So whether because of cost or because of some other unknowns. But there are thoughts into, not just, because probably all of us in this room, especially with things like the Paris Agreement and politically things changing, we see that changing human behavior and modifying those kinds of things are hard. We don't like changing. We would rather just, I'm happy to change with, getting more money and going on more trips and eating better food and getting new clothes, but I'm not so happy to change in the other direction, In certain cases is necessary, or, for those of you who've maybe had change in life, circumstance, but it's never one that we put ourselves in a willing type of manner. So same kind of idea with technologies that can help find our way out of some of these challenges. And then just as another example, there's also this idea that in other areas of science that we don't hear contested, we have various ways to determine how old the universe is, and so same kind of idea, 98% certainty that the universe, remember I'm talking about the universe, not the sun. I know we hear about the sun being, 5 billion years old, and if you're looking at this going, usually all these things I hear about the universe or space are 5 billion years old. That's our magic number. We're talking about the universe. So just context. So certain things in other areas of science, we have a lot of the same types of discussions, that there's still only 97-98% certainty, which for theories and kind of published papers and research, we say is good enough. So, just kind of a little bit of context.
That's probably a dumb question, but if it's 13.8 billion years old, does that mean it's 13.8 billion light years big because it's expanding? I don't know if that makes sense.
I would say no.
Theoretically, or in terms of understanding, the universe is infinite, which means that the problem with it is that it expands, space itself expands, and has a quote-unquote limit, but getting to that limit requires going faster than the speed of light, because the universe is expanding faster than the speed of light at our current moment if you go to the quote-unquote edge, plus we're expanding into nothingness, which is kind of hard to determine a distance to. So
This is why I drink.
I know.
it's really weird.
It's why it's like there's not really an easy answer for this
Yeah,
one.
because theoretically
Um.
there's a size to the universe, but at the moment it's impossible to know how big it is because because it's expanding faster than the speed of light. All we can do is make some kind of guesstimate.
Yeah.
But we don't really know because the universe is expanding and accelerating in
Right.
its expansion because of dark energy.
Right, so we still have that open percentage of many factors that we don't know. Yes?
I don't believe that. Well, for matter of fact, he don't state who he quoted. How many people he quoted? He said 98%. That could be like 2 out of 3. Maybe 2 out of 3 people. How many
Okay.
people did he quote? How many scientists did he quote?
Okay. That's important when we look. We're talking about scientific consensus here. So this was just a quote from a particular gentleman. But of all of the people who do this science, we look at essentially published papers when we come up with what is a scientific consensus. We say, okay, of all the papers published on climate change or on age of the universe or gravity or whatever your topic is, we then say, okay, of that, they might be looking at different things within that subject, but that they're all based off of one particular type of conclusion. So they don't agree necessarily in the perspective of climate science, like they use different models, for example. So they might say, I've created this model that says cloud cover is more important than scientist X. And I'm going to say climate change is not as big of a deal as scientist X. So we're still saying climate change is an issue, but we have varying ideas of what that looks like in practice. So that's when I say scientific consensus, we're looking at amount of published papers, peer-reviewed published papers, not web pages of people who decide that they want to say yes or no, but published peer-reviewed papers.
So what's the published peer-reviewed consensus on the Flat Earth Society?
That's a good question, and I'm gonna hope that it's less than like 1%, but I don't know.
Ethan is their leader.
Yeah, dude. Follow me on Twitter.
So it's almost 11:45.
Okay.
So I just wanna let you know.
And I kind of just wanted to give a bit of a call to intellectual curiosity action, not so much go and change the world, which is always a good call to action. But there are a lot of things that you're going to hear that say things like 20%, they'll look at this and say, okay, glaciers you're saying are leaving and they're getting smaller and it's terrible. But really, look at this ice sheet. It's gotten bigger, right?
Yes.
You can find one nice good example where you say 20% of the world's glaciers have grown in recent years. Yes, but what about the other 80% of these glaciers? So be careful, and this is just
Isn't that called cherry picking?
as for scientific inquiry, for those of you who are interested in knowing that truth, be aware that when they present it to you, if you've ever taken a statistics class, there are plenty of things I can tell you truthfully without necessarily truthfully representing what that looks like. So yes, 20% of the world's glaciers have increased in size, but the other 80% are decreasing. So same kind of idea where we have this average where certain areas we might get more ice, certain areas we're seeing less, but we're looking at net impact, which in this case is negative. So just remember when you hear things like this, be critical of what their source is and be critical. And I'm glad that you brought that up with what are you telling me, 98%? What is our sample size? What are we looking at here? Because that's exactly, just for your peace of mind in any subject, what you should be asking. So question these people and what they're telling you. But yes, with that, are there any last minute questions? I have a super exciting doctor's appointment that I'm not looking forward to going to, but apparently I can't stay here with you lovely people.
Well, thank you, Jill, for coming in, giving us
Oh,
this
thank you.
background.
And thank you all.
Okay, so let's break for 10 minutes. So we'll come back at 5 till noon, and then we'll do our what's trending because we have a lot of what's trending. thing to go over.
There's a
And
lot
so come
trending.
back at 11:55. Thank you, Jill.
I'm so sorry about this hole everywhere
I
that
don't
I
think-
somehow messed
Oh,
up.
don't worry about it. It's no big deal.
This is gonna be great.
Jill, I'm really
Last
disappointed.
time.
I'm like really disappointed in
All
you.
the awesome ones they know for this.
Okay, I'm gonna mute while we are on break so that online students don't have to listen to Ethan's shrill voice. So
You are now muted.
Thank you, Jill. That's perfect.
Thank you. I kind of want to see what's happening on.
Come in on Wednesday. Come in, because we're gonna like the Paris Climate Agreement is 27 pages, so I'm gonna have them like each take like kind of a chunk, and we're gonna analyze it, and then look at the assessments that have come out in the news media, you know,
So good.
the pros and cons of it. So
Are you leaving during like the class?
okay.
I have a doctor.
No, she was saying you have you're on vacation or something.
Oh yeah,
Oh,
I was gonna have her come in week 7, but she's gonna be.
There was a really good deal to talk.
Okay, well, of course, yeah.
I have a problem.
That's fine. We all have problems.
Yeah, you do.
Biggest problems, Abby.
Oh,
Have you seen the thing on Facebook? Thanks, Abby. Have you seen the thing on Facebook where the guy brought a level, like a construction level on a plane to prove the Earth is flat? Yeah.
I know BOB thinks the world is flat. He climbed up like a 50-foot building, and he took a picture. He's like, I'm 50 feet up in the air, and I still don't see the curve of the Earth. Explain.
So why don't you find the end of it and jump off?
Yeah.
That would be definitive proof.
They think
I know.
They
The
think,
stupid, it hurts,
they
doesn't
think
it?
like
Okay,
Antarctica.
that makes me think that they're not that stupid. They have an agenda.
They do have an
There's
agenda.
no way someone's
Well,
that
and,
stupid.
you know, a lot of it
There's
too
no
is
way.
like the media picks up on people that make bold statements, whether they're
Yeah.
true or they're just
Yeah.
trying to get their name out there, right?
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Even though now we all know you're an idiot, or we all
Yes.
think you're an idiot because you're promoting something that is, I mean,
Complete.
like conservative, leftist, like we all can like unite against our disdain for the flat Earth society.
There was a tweet that someone was just like, there are flat Earth societies all around the globe.
I know.
Comment was,
It's like think about that.
what-
Think about that
what you
statement.
say.
I'm gonna go grab a drink real fast, like a real drink
need a-
after that. To dry campus. What's for lunch today, Ethan?
Alright, we're-
I got it.
I need a day off.
Are you shit out of high school also? Are you shit out of high school?
No, I took a year off and then I came here.
Nice. So did I. Well, I graduated last year, and I didn't go to college right away. I just I had to work for a year.
Yeah, and then I took a year off to do just some personal projects and stuff like that. Always a counter.
Ooh, burr. It's cold in here now.
It's not that cold. Could be worse.
I just chewed a bunch of ice though, so that might.
Yeah, that
I'm cold, therefore climate change is not real.
totally.
Apparently, there's only 2 countries that aren't in the Paris Climate Agreement.
3 now.
Oh yeah, excluding the U.S.
I know.
Even North
Why?
Korea's in it.
I know. I know.
Makes me want to punch him. Honestly, I'm really hoping that he steps down.
He's not.
Like, I just hope he does. Just steps down
Oh, that's not what I wanted.
and like,
The online students are gonna be like, "What is she doing?"
yeah.
I'm getting our participation nugget going, which will be. It was the 3 countries, not.
Oh man, I know Nicaragua was not in it because
They thought it wasn't strict enough.
yeah, it's not good enough for them.
See, the biggest thing is that it's completely like that. Doing that is Trump doing that, and everything else that he's been doing is just wrecking our
Our
country's-
reputation
our-
on the world's. Like,
the trust.
well, okay, so when I look at the implications of this election as a historian, because I look at everything historically. It's just a curse. But during the election, I really liked Bernie Sanders. That was like my guy.
Yeah.
And I grudgingly voted for Clinton because, I didn't want to, but I didn't want Trump.
Exactly. Bernie could have won.
And he could have won. He would have won those northern states that she lost, that like typically go blue, like Michigan, Pennsylvania. But okay, so I digress on that. I really think that she would have done a much better job representing us on the world community. She knows how to deal with world leaders. She knows the diplomacy, and that's where I think his biggest failings are. Is he just doesn't understand certain things have to be done and said in a specific way to keep the trust of your allies and your partners. And now people are saying Germany is the leader of the free world, and Angela Merkel is the leader of the free world, and the U.S. no longer is.
Like, the biggest thing is that what you say has implications.
Yes.
Everything you say
Yes.
has implications, undertones, and
Especially when you're in that position.
exactly.
Everything you do and say or tweet, like Covfefe, which I agree is ridiculous. Everyone has typos. We all do typos.
Yeah.
But when you're president, you might want to be aware that everything you do and say is going to be criticized, and you need to maybe not have your typos on your
I was willing
tweets.
to give him a chance, but he squandered that within the first week.
That's how I felt too. With Bannon.
My biggest thing is like, because my parents are Trump supporters, and so it's hard for me to like. I'm okay with supporting Trump, like he's a good businessman, or like just like the pros and
Right.
cons. But like when you just ignore all the cons, and because my stepdad will always post something about like Trump. When people go after Trump, he'll bash like those people, and like he just said the most retarded thing I've ever heard in my entire life, and you're still just like.
Well, he seems to be held, since he's not a politician, he's kind of held to a different standard. Here's a good example. When you looked at, remember when Hillary Clinton made that statement about deplorables, right? And how, oh my gosh, she called us all deplorables, which she shouldn't have said. It's a ridiculous statement, and again, everything. But then I look at, like, what I call it Pussygate, Trump's statement, right, with that recording where he's like, I grab him by the pussy. Why doesn't that discount him as a candidate? When if Hillary Clinton says, I grab him by the dick, that would have, blown up in her face, So he's like held to this different standard because he's not a politician. And I understand that's his appeal to a lot of people is, okay, we're sick of this PC culture, we're sick of that.
That's what my stepdad
I
said.
get that. But there's surely some better people other than Trump that aren't politicians. Like,
The biggest problem with
could still run the
supporting-
country.
The biggest problem with supporting him because he's a businessman is that the president is not supposed to be a businessman.
Right.
He's a politician.
Well, and the United States is not a business. We are a collection of people.
Yes.
And so he also hasn't divested himself from his companies, and every time he goes to Mar-a-Lago, he makes money because the Secret Service has to buy rooms and amenities there, and that goes into his pocketbook. That
I saw that.
is
Yep.
highly unethical. And if
Exactly.
Obama had done that and had a hotel that he went to and brought the Secret Service, or if George W. Bush did that, or if Bill Clinton did that, people would have jumped all over them. For whatever reason, he's exempt from that. And I think as a historian, that's what we're going to be looking at, is what's the difference between him and the 44 other presidents before him,
Yeah.
that he's doing things that would have discounted them, or at least would have caused much more of an outrage from both sides politically.
See, the biggest thing is that it's extremely obvious. Everything he is doing is because of a financial agenda.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And his kids, too. Ivanka Trump got patents from the Chinese the night that they had dinner with the Chinese president.
Yeah, it's ridiculous because this is going to be a shit show of this is what happens when you let a businessman be president.
Yeah.
There are back-end deals, there are agendas, and there are
Well, and not only
political
that,
moves that are occurring all over the place.
I would say, not necessarily just because he's a businessman, but he didn't do the blind trust that most presidents do. Like, they diverge themselves of their business interests. They take themselves away from it. And in a blind trust, you're not supposed to turn it over to your family members. It's supposed to go to somebody that has no connection to you personally, right? He hasn't done any of that, and that's the problem. I'm not opposed to someone with a business background, but you have to take the proper ethical steps as the president
Which is
to make sure you're not profiting off of that office.
yeah, like that's what I'm saying is that like Trump is treating the presidency like a business.
Yes.
That's what I mean by saying letting a businessman be president is
Right.
that Trump is taking the presidency and he's turning it into his own personal business.
Well, all I say right now, I saw this meme that I thought was really funny, and is right after Obama got elected in 2008, someone made this meme with George W. Bush and it said, "Miss me yet?" Right? And then someone updated it for now, and it's all, dear baby Jesus, yes. I actually do kind of miss George W. Bush.
Well, it was funny when he made like mistakes, but they were cute.
Well,
Like,
this is kind of how, again, historically speaking, I look at the past presidents as, I disagree with Bush politically, but I think deep down he made decisions he thought were best for the country. And not like, I didn't invade Iraq because, I wanted to make a ton of money off of it. I think he felt that was probably the best decision for the country. It was misguided, and he was given bad information from his advisors, but I don't think he personally was like, "Mwahaha, I'm going to get the U.S. involved in this quagmire of a war, and we're going to create ISIS." And I look at Trump, and I look at Obama, I think he made decisions like that. Look at Clinton. All past presidents, I think, felt they were making the right decisions. And with Trump, I feel like he just is not. He just is missing that.
He doesn't have the people in mind.
In my opinion. So, okay.
I agree with that.
Yeah.
He doesn't seem like he's.
You are now unmuted.
The consequences of his actions
Right.
for the people in general.
Okay, so we are back from break. I'm going to start off with our participation nuggets. Kind of in line with what Jill was talking about with climate, and what we're going to be talking about on Wednesday is, I don't have slides today, so I just did it on Notepad. The 3 countries not in the Paris Climate Agreement are the United States, Nicaragua, and Syria. So if you want to snap a photo of that, and we'll make sure David gets that when he gets back as well. Looks like he just stepped out. Okay. So the 3 countries not in the Paris Climate Agreement. Syria, for obvious reasons, they're in the middle of a civil war, and so that's might put climate issues on the back burner. Nicaragua actually felt it didn't do enough, and for the U.S., we'll talk about that on Wednesday. I did want to make a point about climate change and the Syrian civil war, though. Some scholars have made a connection between the unrest in Syria and climate change. Because in the years leading up to 2011, Syria experienced a severe drought, and a lot of people that were living in the countryside and were farmers went into the cities. And they feel like that put a lot of pressure on the political structure, because you had people coming in the cities that then don't have the jobs for these people, and it was creating kind of political pressure on the city. So that's something else to consider about climate change, is the military and political implications of it, because future wars could be fought over water, right? Arable land, resources, right? And so that's something to consider when you consider not just the climate part of it and the environment, but also the other implications that come with these scientific issues. Okay, so I'll bring this back up for David later, but did everyone get this down for the day? Okay, cool. All right, so I want to obviously talk about what's trending. I didn't want to do the beginning of class since Jill had to leave a little early, and so I wanted to make sure that she had plenty of time to talk to you guys about the science behind climate change. So what did you guys notice over the weekend was the big story? Well,
her statement.
Yeah, right. She had a press conference, because now the Secret Service is investigating her.
Yeah, well, she was saying that he ruined my career.
Well, she ruined her own career for not being
She
funny.
never had a career.
No.
What's this?
So remember the Kathy Griffin?
Yeah.
Okay, she did a press conference because now she's under investigation by the Secret Service, and which is what happens when you show a severed head of the president. But she made a claim. What she say that?
She said basically she's like, he ruined my career. He sent everyone is attacking me now because he sent them after me.
No, everyone's attacking her. Liberal, conservative are attacking her for
Well,
that.
and then she said if I was a man, this wouldn't happen.
No, that has nothing to do with it. It was just a poor taste. David, you missed the participation nugget.
So friends and I were chatting. Somebody found a picture of her getting a hug from Mr. Trump.
Right.
When she was invited to one of his parties.
Yeah.
Didn't have a problem then.
Exactly.
Now all of a sudden he's not buying drinks for her.
Right.
She's got a
She's
problem.
just a hypocrite, and I think everyone saw that with this thing. And as far as I'm concerned, when it comes to her career, she
Never had one.
she didn't really have a big career to begin with, So
I think
it's not like people are like, "Are you guys checking out the Kathy Griffin show this weekend? She's gonna be in town." No one's really into her.
There's this 20-year-old video, I don't know how old it is actually, but of Trump praising the Clintons during
Oh, yeah.
the friends of
There's a picture of the Clintons together at a wedding.
yeah.
They're all buddies,
Yeah.
all these rich people are kind of all connected. But I do want to point out the Kathy Griffin thing. That was in poor taste, and obviously she should not have done that. But that's been kind of done with a lot of presidents lately. When you look at Obama, there were people making pictures of him being hung and being lynched and things like that. So that's been done before, and I think all sides need to be outraged at that. Like, there are ways, I think it's an American tradition to criticize the president, right? But there are ways to do it, appropriate ways. And there's limits, right, to where you criticize the president.
If you want to be, if she's a comedian trying to be funny,
Right.
there's funny ways
Yeah,
to do
like
it.
look at John Oliver, look at Stephen Colbert, right? Like The Daily Show, like all those guys are criticizing the president, but they're doing it in a way that's appropriate and within, civilized limits, So I think we can all agree she killed her own career by not being funny and then doing this. Did you get this, David, down for your? Okay, perfect.
Oh, so she showed a severed head.
You didn't see it?
I haven't heard
Okay, well, I've just got to show it.
I'm so lost right now. Oh my god,
Yeah, I know. Okay, hold on. She photoshopped it, of course, but
Well, and apparently the photographer is also very he does a lot of risque stuff.
yeah.
But I haven't heard him get any backlash yet.
Okay. Well, yeah, I mean, she's the one in the picture, so she's obviously the visible
And
one.
there's a video
All
of
he,
them.
all he did was get paid.
There's a video of them beforehand, talking about, oh, we're gonna get in trouble for this. Like, why do it?
I know. Yeah, don't have your name connected to
No.
that, right? Okay, well, what was the other big story this weekend?
The bombing.
In London, right? So this was actually not a bombing, right? Do you guys remember? So there was 3 terrorists, right, in a van, and they started running people over on London Bridge, and then they also started stabbing people. So they actually were using this wasn't AK-47s or suicide bombs or things that you're kind of used to. They did it a different way, and so it killed. I think it's up to 7 people now. To be honest, over the weekend when I heard it, I was like, I can't even process this right now. I don't even want to think about it because it's just getting so depressing, right? Like every week there's something new. So when you look at the news, obviously it's all over the New York Times. It's on the Guardian. They've named 2 of the 3 men responsible here on the Guardian. So this is live. This has just been updated. Well, here's what I wanted to point out. I don't know if they've got away. I'm not sure yet. I haven't read through this one because it just hit during class. It was on my phone. But here's the problem. They're citizens. Okay, so when you look, Trump's initial reaction after this was he tweeted about the travel ban, right? Which he actually hurt himself because he said earlier it wasn't a travel ban. But that is something we have to consider here. How do you stop these people coming in these countries? But if they're citizens, a travel ban doesn't even matter, right? If they're citizens. So it's bringing up all of these kind of constitutional issues, right? Because if you are going to do a ban on Muslim countries, the problem with Trump's ban that got a lot of issues from the ACLU was it's unconstitutional because you're targeting a religion. But another problem is he left out major countries. Like, if you're going to do it, put Saudi Arabia on that list, right? Put Egypt on that list. But there are our allies, so there's political consequences. So I don't even know where to go with that. I don't agree with having a travel ban. I don't think, if anything, I think that would radicalize more people if they feel that the West is shut off to them and they have nowhere else to go. But at the same time, I see the point of people that say, well, what else can we do, right? Because what we're doing now isn't working, right? So what's the next step? Let me share with you what I think is a viable option, which obviously Trump isn't going to listen to me, and neither are other world leaders. But I think that at some point we have to say, where is Saudi Arabia? Where is Oman? Where is Qatar? Where is the UAE? Look at the city of Dubai. That country is rich, right? Why aren't they putting their soldiers on the ground and fighting ISIS? Why are Western soldiers doing this, and why are Western people feeling they're not going to Saudi Arabia and killing people, right? They're not going to Qatar and killing people. They're coming to these Western countries. So I think that the world community, especially Western countries, but just the world community, including Russia, China, Iran, needs to say the Muslim world needs to be in charge of this. We can help in a capacity, right? We will help you because this is impacting the entire world. But I think at some point, something's got to be done differently. And I think that different factor is getting Muslim countries involved where they're not being involved. What do you guys think of that? And then your ideas as well, just open discussion. What do we think? Frank?
Yes, I think they should be involved. The other Muslim countries, Saudi Arabia and stuff. The other thing is, the travel ban was only, he only wants it in for 90 days
Right.
so that they can put together a better, way to,
Right, and I get that.
to sort them, I guess.
But I get that, but the problem is, he said, we're putting this travel ban, it was 7 countries, right? Where no terrorists from those countries have actually done anything in the United States. Saudi Arabia was glaringly missing from that list when 15 of the 19 terrorists on 9/11 were from Saudi Arabia. So that's where people were having the issue. I think a lot of people are open to the idea of, yeah, we need to do something different, right? And if there is going to be a travel ban, it's got to be equitable. But if Trump then puts Saudi Arabia on a travel ban, right, they're our allies. So what does that do with this weapons deal we just did with them? You know, so if we're going to say we're going to ban Muslims from this country, first of all, that is unconstitutional. Okay, it is a violation of the U.S. Constitution. That's a fact. Second of all, if we ignore that and we say, okay, we are going to, because of, in light of these situations, we're going to break the Constitution, we're going to do this, it has to be all Muslim countries, right? If you're going to be fair and equitable about, you know, where these terrorists are actually coming from. Because do you guys know the last time a refugee in the U.S., a refugee actually killed an American citizen? Is the early 80s. So we're not really at risk for that, but people feel that, right? Because there's a hysteria surrounding this, right? Like we all in this room have a much bigger chance of getting killed by an old white Christian man in this country. That's just a fact. You have a bigger chance of that in this country, of getting killed by another American than you do of getting killed by a terrorist. But when these events are happening, like, you know, one of the women that died in London this weekend was a Canadian. I think she was there because her fiance is British, and she moved over there to be with him, and she's just hanging out on London Bridge, and bam, you're dead. So I get the hysteria around this, but you can't make legislation and rules like this based on hysteria, right? You have to kind of step back and make measured decisions, and, you know, I think Trump made a mistake this weekend because he attacked the London mayor's response, and he's using it as a political, and that's, to me, it's just very tacky. Like, what you should have been tweeting is, we have our thoughts and prayers, or, you know, we stand behind you, but don't use this as an opportunity to push your own travel ban. Jason and then Ethan, what do you think?
The fact of that matter is, he took it completely out of context.
He did take that guy.
He took a quote when it wasn't the actual quote. It isn't a quote. He molded it to what he said.
What do you think, Ethan?
I was just gonna say that where we live today, like, information travels so fast.
Exactly.
That even a lot of times on, like, Facebook, you have those, like, I checked in, I am safe.
Right.
So the minute anything happens, there's this giant panic of, oh, we're waiting for either, like, something else to happen.
Right.
So I think people jump on, like, they get angry right away.
They do.
Where,
and you can't blame them, you know, when you see things like this for, you know, that reaction.
and I follow, there's a bunch of guys who like wrestling in Britain, and so I follow them on Twitter, and so when that happened, they're talking about that, and they're, like, you know, voicing their opinions, so it kind of just, like, puts opinion on me,
Right.
like, how I feel about it. So I just think with everyone, you have everyone's opinions all at once, and a giant, and you get the opinions you kind of want to hear.
Right.
So if you follow the right, you're going to hear the right, and if
Right.
you follow the left,
And that's why it's so important to triangulate, right? Your news sources, so that you're not just reading what you agree with.
you say triangulate, but people aren't going to.
No.
Like, you want to hear what you want to hear.
Yeah, that's just the human condition.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I think with, you know, the information being pushed out way too fast, I think me and you talked about this, where, like, Dave Chappelle talked about how our generation, like, you hear bad news every single day.
Right.
Because it's on the internet. So, like, it's like this to me, like, it sucks, but, like, it doesn't affect my life. It's some
Right.
people, but, like, you know, I don't care.
Right, but if your dad was over there visiting London Bridge and it impacted you,
Yeah,
it'd
I
be
would
different.
care.
Right.
Yeah, but, like, because it just feels like another day that some people died because of this one thing. I
Right.
don't care
You're getting, like,
because I hear
desensitized.
it's the same thing as last week.
Okay, so I want to go back to the travel ban because I watched a really interesting Frontline this weekend called Bannon's War. I don't know if you guys have seen any. It's one of the newer Frontlines. It just came out like 2 or 3 weeks ago, and it's focused on Steve Bannon and his role in the Trump administration, and it goes into, like, his history and, like, how he kind of came to hold the views he did. I would really recommend you guys watch it at some point. But they talked about the travel ban. If you guys remember when the travel ban was revealed or whatever, it was on a Friday afternoon. And it was done purposely. Like, everything Trump and his administration is doing, and this goes for any president, it's calculated, right? It's a political calculation. And Trump and Bannon realize that if we roll this out on a Friday, people will go out, they're going to make a stink about it. It's Friday, they're going to be able to leave work, they're going to go to protests, right? If you do it on like a Tuesday, like who of us can really go to a protest on a Tuesday, right? Like, well, I got to pick up the kids and, you know, I got to go to work the next day, I don't really have time for this. They calculated it. And they're talking about that in there as a way to really maximize the media exposure that it was going to get and maximize the amount of people that would express their anger because they could kind of feed off that. So I think that was really interesting. And if you guys are interested in the Trump administration and the people within the administration, I would highly recommend you watch that. Another thing I want to point out about Trump's administration that I saw online that made a really good point is, how many of you know a lot of the names in the Trump administration? Like, do you guys know a lot of the people? Like, I mean, you know Bannon, right? Well, the reason I'm bringing this up is because a lot of times when things go wrong, you know the people then, right? Like, a lot more people now are politically active because of this election and they want to know what's going on. Like, how many of you knew anything about Obama's cabinet, right? Like, you probably didn't know a lot. Like, did you know who his Secretary of Education was? And did you know who his Secretary of the Interior and Secretary of Energy? And we know it a little bit more now because it's getting more play. I do want to bring up a point about Betsy DeVos, though. You guys probably heard a lot about her and the Secretary of Education. She's actually staffing her department really well. A New York Times did an article on this, actually, and I was like, oh, here we go. Like, they're all, Betsy DeVos is staffing the Department of Education. I'm like, oh my God. She's actually really polling from both political parties, and she's polling people that are actually very, very qualified for their position, which she's not really for her position. She was the most contested cabinet pick in history in the Senate confirmation. But she's actually, I mean, I got to give her the benefit there. Like, you don't really know what you're doing, but you're surrounding yourself with people that do. And I have to commend her on that. I think that's an important distinction. Like, even if you don't agree with administration, I think it's important that when there is something that is a good part of it, that does need to be highlighted, it does need to be brought up and pointed out to people that would normally look at, like, because so many people look at Trump and they're just so polarized by him, right? That no matter what his administration does, they're not going to like it. But there are going to be things that Trump's administration does that are good, right? And we need to highlight that. We need to point it out whenever possible, right? So. Okay, anything else you guys noticed this weekend other than these London attacks, which is still unfolding? Did you guys notice this? Let me see if it's on here. This just came out this morning. Okay, so 5 Arab states just broke ties with Qatar, which complicates the U.S. because these are all allies of the U.S. But our biggest base in the region is in Qatar. Did you guys know that? Yeah, so this is something that just...
Why did they break ties?
Because apparently it was, and this just broke, like I just started about reading this morning. It was something about, let me see if it comes up. Something about hacking, like, let's see. Let's just kind of... Okay, so... An abruptness... From what I read this morning, it was a really short article. It was something about they're accusing Qatar of like hacking their systems or something like that. Air traffic. Well, now all these countries are disrupting their air traffic. Oh, it's not immediately clear why the 5 countries decided to take this action now. Last month, Qatar's state news media published comments attributed to the Emir Sheikh Tamim bin Hamad Al Thani. How'd I do on that, guys? Pretty good? I'm getting better at my Middle Eastern names. Referring to tension with Washington over Iran policy and saying Mr. Trump might not be in power for long. Qatar denied the comment, saying it had been the victims of a cyber crime. But most analysts pointed to President Trump's recent visit to Saudi Arabia. So this is really, really important. It's getting buried under the terrorist attacks in London, but this is something that we should all keep an eye on what's going to come out of this, because it looks like it's creating more unrest and more tension within those wealthy countries within the Middle East, which we depend on, right, in that region. So read up on that if you get a chance today. I'm sure you'll see an article link of it at some point. But it says it's not immediately clear, but I'm sure within the next day or two there'll be more information on this.
When I first looked at bullishness, I thought it was bullshit.
Wait, where was it? Oh, Okay, so any other things you guys want to bring up in the news that you saw over the weekend? That was a big weekend of what's trending, so definitely keep an eye on it. We'll, again, on Wednesday when we start class, we'll look at anything new that came out of the London attacks. We'll probably have a lot more information on the people behind it, maybe motivations. ISIS did claim it, so that's something to consider as well. And then, so what we'll do on Wednesday is we're going to look at the Paris Climate Agreement. It's a 27-page agreement. We're going to break it up throughout the class. We're all going to read a few pages. And then we're going to come together and look at it as a group, so that way we all don't have to read 27 pages, but I'll give you each a few pages to read, and then you'll tell the class what was in that. And then we'll talk about how the news media has been reporting on Trump pulling us out of it, what Trump said. We'll look at his speech in the Rose Garden about why he pulled the U.S. out, and look at his reasoning and see if what we know off the agreement, if that is an appropriate response or not. Ethan.
Has there ever been a terrorist attack that was claimed that later on wasn't, like, actually?
Yeah, sometimes, or like two groups will claim it or something, like, yeah.
I dibs.
Yeah, because they're like, what a great attack! What a great attack! I'm going to claim that. Yeah, but I mean, at this point, it's always going to be anything Western is going to be ISIS or Al Qaeda, most likely ISIS, you know. But that also brings up a good point about another thing I noticed people were talking about is how can you break ISIS's recruitment by censoring the internet? And that opens up a big can of worms, right? How do you shut down the avenue? Because that's how they're recruiting people, right? Is through social media. So how do you shut down their recruitment without violating your rights as an internet consumer? Exactly.
It's
So
not possible.
I know, because everything we do now is based on this, right? You apply for a job, it's online, right? Everything we do is based on the internet now. So I don't really see how that is a viable option. But again, everyone's kind of now discussing where do we go from here. So all these ideas are kind of being thrown out.
A plague.
See,
We're right for a plague.
it's straight up not possible to do that. It's straight up not possible.
Yeah.
It's opening up avenues for abuse.
They'll-
It's not.
Yeah, they'll just open another avenue.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's not possible to be
Exactly.
able to block all of that off.
This is why I just drink.
Just
and
with
watch
how the
wrestling.
internet works, it can't.
Yeah.
It will not work.
I agree with you on that. And you can't, I mean, you just can't censor it in any way, shape, or form. The internet has to maintain a openness,
It
right,
does.
for it to be what the internet is,
Can you
right?
teach like a good news class?
I know, right?
Like every day it's just like, hey, bad news again.
I know. I know. I feel like when we start class, we're always like, yeah, and then at the end we're all,
Well, the RPG.
goodbye, cruel world. All right, well, you guys are free to go. I'll see you on Wednesday for the Paris Agreement. We'll break that down. We'll learn more about it. You guys will probably be the most educated people in the city about the Paris Agreement because I guarantee you, almost no one's read it. Right. So we're going to read it, and we're going to know what's in it, so we can debate it more effectively. Okay? You guys have a great day. I'll see you on Wednesday. Don't tell me how to live my life. It's so depressing, though.